everyone, and thank you once again for being with us today for Wayne's World. I'm Wayne Dawson, and my next guest is a longtime civil rights activist in Cleveland's longest-serving pastor, touching countless lives in the city's Glenville community as the leader of the historic Greater Abyssinia Baptist Church and as the board chair of the National Action Network's Cleveland chapter as well. Please welcome the one and only, the Reverend Dr. E.T. Caviness. Good day to you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it.
I've also done 23 years here with SCLC, the chairman of that chapter, Cleveland chapter, for the last 24 years.
For the last, so you've been involved politically and religiously for many, many years. Let me just ask you this, 97 years old. What's the secret?
The secret is, if I had known that I was going to live this long, I would have taken much better care of myself.
You know what? I got to dispute that because you look wonderful. You look great. You walked in here faster than I did, and I'm way younger than you. But you're in better shape than I am right now.
I don't know about that, but thank you very kindly.
Let's talk about your early life. Now I know that you were born 1928.
28.
That was a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah, life was a whole lot different back then.
Very different.
In Marshall, Texas.
Right.
What was that like?
It was a segregated town of division and things that were not really considered appropriate and good for African American people. My first really recognition of that kind of situation was when I went to City Hall. And I saw a configuration. It was a bar between whites and blacks. Yeah. Never the twain shall meet. Yeah. When I saw that caricature of that poster, it delved into my heart and soul. Mm-hmm. And I thought right then that I must dedicate my life and all of what I try to do to trying to bring people together instead of separation. Regardless of race, creed, or color, people need to be together, and so I made that commitment within my own heart.
Back then, as a young man. Now, you moved to Cleveland in 1961.
Yes, sir.
Before that, how did you get into the ministry?
Well, I really, at 17 years of age, I was compelled with a calling that I thought meant that I needed to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay. And so I was committed to that. At 17, I became ordained, and then I had my first church in Picton, Texas, St. Mark Baptist Church. And
at the age of what?
At the age of 17.
Are you kidding me?
Yes, sir.
My goodness gracious.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I went on from St. Mark, Picton, Texas to Madison, Illinois,
okay.
and Madison, Illinois. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I left there and went to St. Paul Baptist Church in East St. Louis, Illinois. I spent 13 years in those environments. Mm-hmm. And 1961, I was called to Greater Abyssinia here in Cleveland.
Now, when you got here in Cleveland, were you involved in the civil rights movement at that time, or did it happen once you got here?
I had been involved in it in terms of trying to make sure that where I was in East St. Louis, Illinois, we had a town of almost 30 or 40% African Americans, and a city hall and a city council that had no African American presence. Okay. And so I dedicated myself to trying to change that situation. And we called Dr. Martin Luther King back in 1955, asked him if he would come to East St. Louis. Mm-hmm. He was very busy. I asked for Caviness. He said he was kind of busy. So in turn, he said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to send my wife, Coretta. So she came in 1955, along with Adam Clayton Powell, and we had a effort to try to make sure that equity and equality was in East St. Louis. And ultimately, we got a African American on the city council. Excellent. And that was a major breakthrough.
Major breakthrough. Now, here in the city of Cleveland, Dr. King, you know, he has a rich history here.
Yes.
And you are part of that history.
Yes.
What type of person was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. behind the scenes? Because we all know who he was publicly, but you knew him personally.
Listen, you've never met a kinder, you've never met a person with magnanimity and personality like Martin King. Mm-hmm. A very brilliant, provocative man who had all the personal charm and the personality second to none. Mm-hmm. He was an affable, kind. To meet him was to know him, never a stranger. He had that kind of about. He had that kind of magnanimity about him that made him a special kind of person and a blessed person to be acquainted with and to walk with.
Now, when we see him, you know, in historically in pictures and stuff, he seems so serious. Was he that way behind the scenes or in person? Was he a serious guy?
This guy had an abundance of personality, always joking, always having fun. I remember so vividly when he said he and some of his men were in the meeting and they were throwing pillows. That's how he was. He was affable, kind, personable, easy to meet, kindly disposed, always a gentleman, but very affectionate, loving, kind. Nothing bad could be said about this
Where
man.
did he get his determination and his focus, do you think? His determination and his focus for the movement. I always thought it was God-given. You know, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think he was born to do what he did. I think ultimately the Lord called him because no one could have gone through the struggle that he went through without that kind of divine intervention and direction.
And he seemed, at the time, as a child, he seemed like an older guy. But he wasn't even 40 years old when he died, was he?
He was 39.
39
Listen. He had a marvelous family. His family was affable. They were elite kinds of average folks who never paraded their greatness, but they were kind of an affectionate, close-knit family that made Martin the kind of great spirit that he was and the great person that he was because of his family, his mother and his father.
Back in the 60s, what type of city was Cleveland at the time?
When I got here in 1961, Cleveland was what we call down south, but Cleveland was up south. Because most of the traditions and the mores and the like that were here was similar to what I came out of. So that Cleveland was a segregated city. It was a city that was imbued with, I guess, a kind of underneath the surface, a separate town.
East side, west side was a reality, wasn't
segregation.
it? Yes,
it was. I would say northern segregation, because you knew where to go. You knew the parameters of where black folk were comfortable. You didn't go past 152nd. You didn't go up toward the Little Italy. So you were kind of confined in a position of knowing, understand. And if you understood the mores here, then you were all right.
I remember when they had desegregation, the first shot at desegregation. And there were protests. Corey Methodist Church right next to you. There was a big protest there. And I remember going to Murray Hill. I was in busing back in the 60s. And they would throw rocks and stuff at our bus. When you consider the segregated nature of the city of Cleveland in the 60s and the election of Carl B. Stokes as the first black mayor of a major American city, how did that happen and what part did you play in that?
Listen. In 1965, we went for the mayor's chair. 1967, we were successful. Things were so separate and so segregated and so demeaning for African Americans until we went to Mayor Loca and asked him to let us discuss, Ralph Loca, let us discuss some kind of improvement for the city. He called us extremists, and instead of bringing us together, he had the police to send us out of the city hall. Wow. And so we talked with Carl Stokes, and Carl Stokes said, listen, don't get angry. Be smart. Let's pull together. Out of that kind of situation, Carl Stokes' victory was won and begun. So Carl said, let's be calm. Let's get everything together. So we, as ministers on 79th and Quincy, came together, and Carl Stokes and Dr. Clement came to visit us. Robert Lawson was the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference. And ministers back then were not inclined to be political. Okay. So I had come to the city because I felt that civil rights included the soul's salvation. Okay. If you're going to save me, you got to save the totality of my being. You can't save my soul without saving me. Okay. So I had a deep, fundamental, philosophical idea that we ought to be integrated in what we're trying to do, and certainly that the church should not be separated from what was going on every day. So I made the motion for the ministers to get with Carl in order for him to go. So we were successful that day, and Carl and Dr. Clement and I walked out of that meeting and began the quest winning that seat. After that, we called Dr. King, and we wanted Dr. King to come to the city. Carl did not necessarily want him to come because Carl had his business all together. All he needed was 20% of the white vote,
Okay.
and that he knew he was free. So he had cultivated John Little and white folks. So he had the 20%.
So he didn't want King to come.
He didn't want King to come.
Were we afraid of him
He
coming?
loved him. He really idolized him. He knew he loved him as a person. But he had his political apparatus put together. All he needed was 20% of the white vote in order to make it. So Martin had just left Chicago, Cicero, Illinois, and they were throwing bricks at him and hostility, and there was so much division and the like. So Carl felt if he came here, that the same thing would transpire, and that would ruin his opportunity. So he called Dr. King and said, Dr. King, I love you to death, but I think I have this together, and I would not like for you to come. Martin said, I've been invited by the ministers, and I'm coming.
Oh, okay.
And so he vowed to come. So these two rough guys, great guys, phenomenal guys, got together at William O. Walker's building.
The Calling Post.
Calling Post,
Former Calling
105th at Chester. They sat down, and Carl explained to him his constituent situation and how he didn't want it impaired by hostility and hatred flaring up in Cleveland. So Martin and he came to a resolution that I'm not going to inflame anything. I'm not getting your way. Stay out of your way. So they got together with an understanding that each was going to do his own thing to make this ultimate victory happen. And that's what happened.
Wow. I tell you what, we're going to stop right now and take a break. We are talking with the Reverend E.T. Caviness, a historian here in the city of Cleveland, a man who has played his part in the city's history. Once again, you're watching Wayne's World. Back in a minute. And welcome back to Wayne's World. I am sitting here with a living legend, the Reverend Dr. E.T. Caviness. We are talking about political history here in the city of Cleveland and things like that. We were talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who him and Carl Stokes had a disagreement about whether or not he should come or not, but he ultimately came.
Right. He said, we've been invited by the ministers and we're going to come. So they ameliorated that situation at William O. Walker's building. And so they went their separate ways, and we became victorious. And with him bringing all his entourage and his resources here, just helped us to gain that victory.
Talk about Carl Stokes. What type of person was he? For those who don't know, because he is a big part of Cleveland history.
Carl Stokes was a very handsome guy. He was gregarious. He melted with people. He meshed with people. He had a personality that was winnable. That you just admired him because he was so personable, smart, brilliant. He and his brother also.
And that Lou Stokes, his brother?
Yeah, that's his brother. And this man was determined to make history. He was in the legislature, and he had the legislature to formulate the 21st District Caucus. And from that 21st District Caucus being put together, he also was able to make his brother the first African-American congressman. But Stokes was a kind-hearted, tough guy. He's a former boxer, so he was nothing fancy about him. Our brother knew what he was doing. But he was a brilliant man. He was a visionary. He had a vision that this town could be the first town to have an African-American mayor. So he set out to do that. He tried it in 65. He didn't make it in 65, but he put his group together, and he was successful in 1967. But let me go back and say, Martin's entrance to this situation was very, very great. On March the 23rd, 1965, Martin left the Selma to Montgomery March, got off that and came to Cleveland. Legs swollen because he had walked about 7 miles the day before. So he came to Cleveland, worn and torn and the like. And we had a parade for him on 105. We marched down March 23rd, 1965, down 105. 6,000 people, Wayne. 6,000 people accompanied
down
him.
100. I lived on Drexel at the time. I vaguely remember that.
That guy, March 23rd, he marched down there with 6,000 people. Corey seated 3,000. So when all the folk got into Corey, 3,000 folks Martin came in, I was sitting next to him. He said, Caviness, we have more people on the outside than we have on the inside.
Wow.
Said, could you open your church and let us accommodate some of them? I said, I'd be more than glad to. I slipped out of the back door and went to our church, and they announced that Martin is going to be at Great Abyssinia now.
Okay.
So we opened our church. Martin slipped out the back door and came over, and he stood in the pulpit of Great Abyssinia Baptist Church. And within 15 minutes, we had about 1,200 people.
Oh, my goodness
So you had
gracious.
1,200 at our church, 3,000 at Cora, and probably 3,000 on the outside.
That's incredible.
I mean, absolutely.
Let's talk about you. 64 years as the pastor of Greater Abyssinia Baptist Church. How do you do it, man? What's the secret of being on the battlefield for that long?
It's a matter of listening to the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
And being guided by divine providence.
Okay.
That's the only way you can explain that, because it's hardly available to people. I was talking to Pastor Rowan, and so Rowan said, Steve Rowan of Bethany.
That's my pastor.
Yeah, right. He said, they kind of get me mixed up. I'm not going to do 64 years. Because it's a long journey, but it's a blessed journey. And the more you do the things that the Lord would have you to do, the more you like it and the more you become a part of it. And it's just you by yourself.
What's the best thing about being a pastor?
Huh?
What's the best thing about being a pastor?
Loving people.
Okay.
Loving people and the love that people give to you. It's reciprocal. You can't pastor folk without loving them. And to love them is to be there for them and utilize the opportunity that the Lord gives you to help them at every propitious moment that they have.
What's the most challenging thing about being a pastor?
I think the most challenging thing about pastoring is that you have to look beyond folks' faults and see their needs. You can't judge people by how they look. You have to deep and probe into their internal activity and their internal self in order to understand that so often they do things that and render things that are not necessarily moral and spiritual, but the Lord said, forgive them.
Got to forgive
for
them.
they know not what they do.
Hey, there you go.
So if you can get past that and love them in spite of, then you can make
I'm
it.
still learning that, Pastor. Anyway, let me ask you, you were on the city council for many years, Cleveland City Council. Talk about those years.
Virgil Brown had the seat. Sidney Frost had the seat. Ward 25, old Ward 25. George Forbes called me and asked me if I would take that seat. Never would I have run for council, never would I have run in a political activity, but I was always interested in the government. And when he asked me to do it, I willingly became a part of the city council.
Was it
I sat there for 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah, and I left there and went to the Board of Zoning Appeal for 6 years. Went to the office of George Voinovich for 10 years.
Okay.
And then I went, for 8 years.
Okay.
And I went to Columbus as his chairman of Ohio Civil Rights Commission.
Was
and
it
I stayed there
difficult?
9 years.
Was it difficult navigating church and state? Was that difficult for you?
Yes, it was difficult because you have to understand that you are being propelled by the goodness of God and the things of God, and sometimes that does not configure with things necessarily every day in the city. And so you have to be very prayerful. You have to be very humble and understanding and be able to go beyond what others might want to do.
What is the role of the church today? We know what role the church played in the civil rights movement. What is the role of the black church today in your mind?
I think the black church of all institutions is probably the center of African American life. It is the virtue of the African American experience, and it is the center of all of what is propelled with regard to equality, justice, and freedom. That's the one place where the elite can sit with the poor and the common and all like that. And it represents the totality of the soul of not only a people, but of a world, a nation, a community. And so the church is that motivator. The church is that operator. The church is that kind of group that's interested in the welfare of all people, not just African Americans, but all people, trying to make sure that people come together. Martin called it a beloved community, a community without racism, a community that's believes in equality, justice, and freedom, where you love everybody and everybody is loved by all.
You've been around, you've worked with so many different mayors here in the city of Cleveland. Do you have a favorite?
Well, you know, George Voinovich, a Republican. I've always been a Democrat. George Forbes tells me all the time, George Voinovich was probably the best mayor of the city of Cleveland. George Voinovich.
Why is that, do you think?
This man, he did not see Democrat or Republican. He saw people. He saw wisdom. He saw togetherness. He didn't see color or creed or gender. He just represented the best of this community and the best of this nation and this state. He was probably a consummate guy. And that came from the mouth of a guy who served 30 years as president of the city council, George Forbes.
George Forbes.
That's what he told me.
Wow.
But you can't, you know, you have to understand that everybody operates in his own lane, his or her lane. So all of these persons that I have been, Jane Campbell, Carl Stokes, certainly, the height.
Mayor White?
Mayor White, one of the best, most brilliant you ever want to see. Man is still visionary. The kind of guy that you'd want on your side or in the foxhole with you. All of these have been great people.
What about Mayor Jackson?
Frank
Jackson, yeah.
16 years, the longest serving mayor of the city. It is what it is.
It's what it is. Wow.
One of the
he was quiet. He was a quiet storm, wasn't he?
But he had vision and he knew where he was going and he held to it.
What do you think about the current mayor? Bibb.
Justin Field, one of the best.
You think so?
Carl Stokes wrote a book. The name of that book was, what was the name of the book?
I remember the book. I can't remember the name. Something
But anyway,
called Power.
On page, I think it's on page 252.
Okay.
He says that my day will come, I will serve my time, and whatever I'm not able to do, it's going to be left to someone else to pick up that baton and do it. And when Mayor Bibb started his quest for mayor, Mike White, Mayor White, who was a great individual, called me and said, Reverend.
Product of Glenville.
That's right. I've looked at everybody, and this is probably the best guy.
That's what he said.
That helped me to understand that this brilliant young man was going to be the best mayor that we could have. And so I wrote my column in the Call-In Post about him.
You still write
for
that
him.
column, don't you?
Yes, yes.
What do you think about the future of the city of Cleveland?
Wayne, this city is sitting on the precipice of a great opportunity to become another great city. When I came here, we had about 900,000 people as a population. Now it's down to 375. But we have opportunity galore. You can see what this young man has in his vision, and he's going to do a greater downtown and a focus on communities that are deteriorating now. And I think his vision and his power and his brilliancy and his opportunity to understand people is going to bring us together and have a great future.
You are absolutely amazing. You know that? You are absolutely amazing. A treasure trove of information in history. It's been an honor. It really has.
Let me just tell you, I thought about it as you asked me to come on this show. I said, wait a minute, I need to be interviewing this man. The blessing that the good Lord has given to you, the projection of your greatness and the humility that you always have, as great as you are. You've just been a beacon of light and a great leader. And I don't know if anybody could go through the pains and struggles that you've gone through and still be the great guy that you are. So I think before I say anything else, you're a great guy.
Thank you so much,
You're the
sir.
iconic guy that we should be lifting up.
Well, this is the legacy. He is no doubt about that. He is number one when it comes to politics, when it comes to religion and faith. The Reverend Dr. E.T. Caviness, the one and only. God bless you, my friend.
I love you.
You are my role model. You are my hero.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank you for joining us. And remember, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, with the help of our Heavenly Father, it can achieve. You've been watching Wayne's World. See you next week. Have a good one.